around and identify ineffective practice. It's also an opportunity that we're not lured along by the new technologies, that we treat them with caution. And I thought it was interesting, the presentation in the research thread about the use of electronic readers, where clearly you have to use a very good evaluative framework rather than sort of rushing headlong after it just because it's the latest technology. So stop starting inappropriately. And of course, at a time of cuts, at a time of threats, evidence-based practice, and this is particularly the case in the school sector, has been used as a way of championing your cause of stopping, of continuing effective practice in the face of budgetary challenges. So the evidence-based practice process, it's described in several ways. Here's a nice summary of it. It's memorable because it's described as the 5 A's. You start by asking a focused question, and a focused question has the characteristic of the decision-making context. Is this particular service more effective compared with this service? Is this way of engaging with our users' needs more effective than this? So it's very much the idea that you're at a decision point. Then you acquire the evidence, and it was very interesting to see some presentations earlier on today that showed that reviewing the literature, even analysing the content of the literature, appraising the studies, so looking at the quality. We don't just believe things because it's in a peer-reviewed journal. We want to weigh it up. Is it good research? Does it have any limitations? We then apply the findings, and then there's 2 things that we do at the end. We assess the impact on our service, and that, of course, is part of monitoring and evaluation. And we assess the impact on our own development. Have we become better decision makers as a result of following through the process? Now, implementing research in practice holds a very real challenge. And the devil is in the detail here, because this statement from the Medical Library Association in the US uses that dreaded word routinely. And one of the things that's been found from evidence-based medicine is that if you try and add a series of evidence-based meetings onto an already busy agenda, it's doomed to fail. And so it's not about working harder, as the cliche goes, it's about working smarter. It's about injecting, about fortifying what you'd be doing anyway, those meetings you'd be having anyway. It's about injecting those with an evidence-based content. So which is a better use of time? An hour spent just arguing around a particular issue, going around in circles, or half an hour of preparation where people read the evidence, they have a common understanding of the issue, and then they discuss what that evidence says. Time-wise, similar, but the outcome markedly different. And this is where we engage with the theme of reflection. And although reflection is commonly thought of the 3rd and 4th aspects here, reflection in action, reflection on action, those are the 2 most common. In a recent article, I've broadened that out. We can be reflecting at every stage of the process. We can be reflecting for action. What are we going to do? How are we going to do it? And we can do that from research, and we can do that from good practice. We don't treat them as equal, but we do treat them as sources, a rich, fertile bed of ideas. Then reflection before action. What are the issues? What are the things I need to bear in mind before I embark on my course of action? And here again, it's not just the literature that will help us there. It's the evidence and expertise from our colleagues. What issues do they identify? What are the obstacles we have to overcome? Then, of course, we have reflection in action, reflection on action, and then a final one, again, an innovation here, reaction. Just because it was right 2 years ago doesn't mean to say the evidence is still saying that it's right now. Is it still worth doing? Again, we need to engage with research and good practice. And this brings me to my final myth, myth number 5, that we have to adopt evidence-based practice exactly as it is. It's a model that comes from medicine. It's a model that was largely suitable for healthcare. It's a model that to a lesser degree is suitable in social care, in education, in management. As you get further from the biomedical model, then the strengths of the model actually dissipate and you have to invent new forms. And that's why it's about adapting the model, not adopting it uncritically. After all, evidence-based practice is not about adopting things uncritically. And so, as a result of a conference a few years ago in Sweden, we identified a few limitations of the model of evidence-based practice. If you think about it, doctors, consultants, general practitioners, they have a tremendous position in terms of decision-making. They're autonomous practitioners, really. And so evidence-based medicine, the idea that you can ask a question and then come up with your solution and act on it, is quite alien to the way that we work as librarians, as work groups, as teams. The second thing is that with that 5-stage process, it assumes that you go through all 5 stages and that you spend time on all of them. And that's really not how we work. And so, as an antidote to that, we proposed a different model, which is more of a corporate model, about a model of working together, articulating the problem. So you have to agree what the problem is in the first place. Assembling the evidence base. It's not just there in one article, it'll be there in data, it'll be there in research articles. All the members of the team bring something to the party. Assessing the evidence, not just a single article, again, looking at different sources of evidence. Agreeing the actions, that process of consensus, far more important than the independent action of an isolated practitioner. And then, if we've got it wrong, we tinker with it, we tailor it. We don't go right the way back to the beginning. And so adapting the implementation is the final part. And certainly we feel that this is a much more practical, more realistic model of how we can work as librarians than the very biomedical model. I'm just, near there. Just wanted to conclude by looking at some of the barriers to evidence-based library and information practice, and I'm afraid in the UK I have a bit of a reputation of being an acronym king here, and so I've not stopped here. So the barriers to research lie in the fates: funding, access, time, experience, and support. Now, time is an easy one because there's a lovely saying that it's never a case of we don't have time for something, it's just that it's not important enough for us. We always find time for things that we feel are important. But there are important areas that we've talked about during this conference, areas regarding experience, regarding support, perhaps through mentoring, that are really important in that context. I'd certainly refer you to a lovely article by Steve Hiller and a colleague, which talks about some of the practicalities of the difficulty of being evidence-based. The volume of evidence, and particularly in our profession, the idea that there's not enough good evidence. You'd be surprised at some of the questions that have been covered by the library and LIS literature, but the quality of them certainly needs dealing with caution. The evidence doesn't quite apply. That's about adapting rather than adopting. People are trying to mislead you. That's one of the issues that we typically face. You are trying to mislead you. The cognitive biases surface again. The idea that the side effects outweigh the cure, that the whole process going through it is actually a challenge that doesn't justify the ends. And we've had some nice testimony during the conference about the power of stories, and certainly we would be wrong to think that managers only respond to statistics, that they're hard-nosed, and certainly stories can be persuasive, but we have to use them in the right context. There's a lovely systematic review in the BMJ which looked at, identified 5 cases of falling out of aeroplanes without a parachute, and looked at the survival rate there. And we certainly wouldn't conclude from that, because there was a survivor, we certainly wouldn't conclude that that was a favourable option. So we mustn't attach too much importance to stories. They're valuable as levers, but we shouldn't put too much attention to them. This is really just a summary slide that points back to some of the issues that I've raised earlier about why libraries aren't evidence-based. And again, it includes that cognitive bias we said earlier of looking at things through our own profession. So, in summary then, where do we lie? Well, we should harness our passions to drive forward the things that really matter, the changes that really matter. We can augment or enhance the effect of those passions by fortifying them with a contribution of research. And with regard to the restraining forces, the things that hold us back, we can use reflection to help us overcome those. And so in this schema that you might be familiar with, the idea of the force field analysis, we're using both research and reflection as a way of changing that dreaded status quo. The final thing that I have to say, having been invited all the way to New Zealand, having a lovely time, being wined and dined, is that we advocates of evidence-based library and information practice are not simply jumping on the bandwagon and gravy train. We see evidence-based library and information practice as a means to an end. We see it as a way of addressing a deficiency, the idea that we can solve our problems by phoning a friend or asking the audience when we should be using higher quality evidence. And so that's why I've argued for quite some time that the long-term future of evidence-based library and information practice isn't about just focusing on research-derived evidence, but it's about building in opportunities for reflective practice. And those catalysts for reflective practice, yes, it might be a new research article that comes out in your field. It might equally be something that a member of staff says over coffee or at the water cooler. It might equally be, say, an observation from your user as you meet them outside the library. And so the ultimate aim, a bit like Molière, who said that he'd been speaking prose all his life without really knowing it. We want the aim where we don't talk about evidence-based practice because we're just professional practitioners. The evidence base is taken as a given. And so the ultimate aim is to use evidence-based practice as a toolbox into which we can dip. And so the ultimate objective of evidence-based information practice is thus to write itself out of existence. And as Shakespeare said, the rest is silence.
Thank you, Andrew. Before we conclude, there is some time for questions. It's a bit hard for me to see, so rather than wave your hand, perhaps if you stand up, though I can't see the microphones around. Oh, yes, here they are at the front. So are there any questions that people come rushing forward? That might be easiest. Rachel?
Is this working? Yes. Thank you, Andrew. That was great. I was fortunate enough to hear you speak in Brisbane in 2005, and I do remember that last slide about evidence-based practice, the ultimate aim being that it will be out of existence. It's just what we do. How far away do you think we are from that? Because that was 6 years ago, and it's still your last slide.
Thank you for that, yes. Yes. I did think long and hard about using that as my last slide, but I think we have seen a movement. Certainly the diversity of areas in which evidence-based practices are being applied within libraries is increasing. So we're seeing spread. We are, recent events last year, again, not wanting to perpetuate the gravy train, but in the Dominican Republic, the Caribbean librarians were really embracing the idea of evidence-based practice. It was an area that hasn't really been permeated by it before. So we're seeing spread. I think the challenge remains that big word routinely again. There are issues around sustainability. I think a lot of evidence-based practice suffers from projectitis, that people see evidence-based practice as projects. And so they see something through to the life of a project and then it doesn't necessarily get sustained. So I think that's one of the big challenges. The heartening thing is that the evidence base around change, not within our profession but more widely, has been significantly developed. So there are lots of tools that we can use to try and get change into practice. And so I feel more confident that we've got better tools to move to this RIP situation. But I haven't yet felt confident to rewrite the epitaph, and thanks for picking up on that.
Thanks for your talk. I was wondering if you can give us some examples from your own experience of library and information practices that have either been discontinued or embraced through the application of evidence.
Yes. One of the workshops that I've run is called Walking the Walk, because there's been a lot of talking the talk, and you're right, it's the examples that sort of clinch it. I think there's some great examples, for example, around every library needs to develop web pages, and we've seen a plethora of very poorly designed web pages. The Cancer Society in the United States came up with some guidelines for web pages, each supported by evidence. So they were the first evidence-based guidelines in our profession. And certainly I know of quite a number of cases where people have reviewed those guidelines and revisited their own web pages, not necessarily trying to apply all of them, but to apply some of them. Some of the other ways that we can sort of disinvest are issues like stock relegation, for example. Books are nice passive recipients of experiments. They don't need ethical approval. We can make changes on the fly with little consultation. So I think a lot's been done, particularly in Canada, around evidence-based collection management. So those are just two examples that come to mind. Without sort of trying to self-promote, I did write an article that talked about 10 steps to practical evidence-based practice, which picked different examples from across the world where people had done exactly these things, and that was published in the Health Information Libraries Journal, and so there's another 8 examples there.
Great, thank you. Well, I think that brings us to a close. I would like to thank Andrew very much for that talk that he gave us. Your passion for evidence-based library and information practice is most definitely evident and enthusiastically conveyed to us. You had many wonderful examples, and many of us will take away some great messages for our own practices. And in recognition, I'd just like to say thank you and offer you. Now I'll hand over to...
That's the song of the kiwi. And been asked, actually, you know, the kiwi's an interesting bird. Iwi means people, and kiwi means bird. Now, the interesting thing about the kiwi is that it gave up flying long ago. According to my people, life was so good here, it didn't have to fly anymore. And it's got a long nose, and only comes out at night. The other interesting thing about the kiwi is that we hold the kiwi up as our emblem, an icon. It's a rather beautiful, interesting bird, very peaceful. And this bird that we hold up as an icon and an emblem and blast all the way around the world is on the verge of extinction. So if we just think about that, and also I'd just add that the kiwi comes out at night. So if you want to meet a few true blue kiwis, go to the Kiwiana celebration tonight, 7 o'clock at the Wharawaka, and we'll see you there, and just let the kiwi have the last word.